Hello, hi. I've been asked to make a video about one of my works, so I've chosen this one, which I consider to be a fairly important work, if you like. I call it Footprints in the Sand. To begin with, I would say that this was, like a lot of my pictures, designed for a particular location, in this case over the mantelpiece in our living room. So my first consideration is the proportion of the canvas, because everything I do in terms of work is in proportion. Normally I like to have an even proportion for one dimension and an odd proportion for the other dimension, typically 2 to 3. This is what Constable did with his large paintings, which were 6 foot by 4 foot for his very large pictures. This particular one, I think, is 5 to 11 proportion. That's the first thing. Second thing is preparation of the canvas. I use multiple layers of acrylic paint. I start off with a very thin wash. I build up to about the third or fourth layer with a full layer of undiluted pigment, and then I finish off with a couple of thinly diluted layers. The intention of this is to provide as much flexibility as possible in the paint surface. Although I've always used acrylic because, right from the outset, because of its long-lasting properties as opposed to oil, which is subject to cracking and varnishing and so on. You don't need a varnish in acrylic painting, although I always do with mine to keep the dirt off them. Then come to the subject itself, which, as you can see, is loosely based on the Pembrokeshire coastline, living as I do in Pembrokeshire. It's a cloudscape, basically, and the difficulties that I had to bear in mind was the shape of the canvas, which I have tried to deal with by drawing the eye into certain areas. Like, for instance, as you can see down here at the far right corner, the sand is very dark. That is designed, the whole thing is designed so that your eye is drawn across the whole canvas. And likewise with these clouds, you've got a sinuous line going across here, and you can follow it through, and it will end up in the bottom left hand corner. So it's running from one corner to the other, and then you get a repeat there. That's the second consideration. The third consideration is that it may not look like it, but everything in this painting is to proportion, or most things are to proportion. The most important elements are to proportion. So without trying to remember too clearly what the proportions are, I know that this point here is the centre line. These various critical points, like the position of that moon, like that point there, like this point here, that point there, the height of the horizon as a proportion of the height of the painting, the height of the sand as a proportion of the height of the horizon. They're all related. This, I think, is 1/7 of that height. I think that is 1/7 of the overall height of the canvas, so on and so forth. So those are other considerations. When I sketch the thing out in pencil, I don't do preparatory drawings. I work straight onto the surface of the canvas immediately with drawing, and usually when I'm setting up the painting I work very fast without thinking about it a great deal. It's mostly instinct. In the case of this particular painting, to speed up, because it was such a large canvas, I simplified the palette I was using. I have only used 3 colours for the cloud, or only 3 paint colours for the cloud: black, white and yellow ochre. That's simply to avoid having to put in, mixing up different colours and making the thing overcomplicated. Makes life simpler. And as you can see, for the main clouds in the back there, they're just white on the blue background. The sea is largely Prussian blue, as it used to be called. It's now called Indanthrene blue in the acrylic colours, and so on and so forth. Third thing to remark about is that nowadays I use acrylic retarder to enable me to blend the paints. I had huge trouble with acrylic in the beginning because it dries so fast, and I developed a system of using brush strokes, small brush strokes, to overcome the difficulties of blending acrylic. Over the years I've started to use acrylic retarder, which is partially successful, as you can see in that area over there, the sand. But it gives it its certain quality, but then I also use small brush strokes as well. So the subject matter, as I say, is a Pembrokeshire coastline, but when I was coming close to the end of the painting, and this is how I work, it's purely instinct. I mean, I don't plan ahead, I make things up as I go along. I trust my instincts and my emotions to guide me. I felt close to the end that somehow I would put in these footsteps, disappearing into the sea. I realised afterwards there's three elements I can think of this. The firstly is the film Far From the Madding Crowd, which was produced in about 1967 or something, very famous film at that time, where Sergeant York does a disappearing act, leaves his clothes on the coastline and walks off into the sea to avoid the troubles he's got himself into. Second thing I thought of was a similar case of that canoeist who did a disappearing act because I think he owed a lot of money or something and ended up in South America. But the third thing is, of course, that the footprints in the sand, there's a human being walking across the sand, and then at the next tide, the tide will come in and wash the sand clean, the footprints will disappear. Well, it's an analogy for humanity in relation to this planet and the brief period of time, just an instant of a time, that human beings are on this planet as compared with the overall length of the planet. We're nothing. We're just a drop in the ocean where an instant of time will be gone. We think we're important. We're of no importance whatsoever. And what we do is of no importance. We try to make a meaning of our lives, but ultimately we are doing no more than any other animal is doing, which is simply reproducing ourselves and trying to survive for the reproduction of the species. And we're basically, that's us, I'm afraid. And everything that human beings do is no more than what animals do, except that we channel it into different ways and means, like men buying big powerful cars and competing with each other on the roads and so on and so forth. So basically that is the purpose of the painting, but mainly I work, as I say, instinctively. I don't think about an awful lot of what I do. When I think something's right to do, I do it. I rely on my instincts, I rely on my subconscious, because art is about the subconscious. All art is. I mean, one of the most interesting statements that's always stuck in my mind is Turner's. He said, "Art a rum do," he said. What he meant by that was, it's a funny business. You can't categorise it. It's like all art. All art is at its best when it uses the subconscious mind. Because when you're using the subconscious mind, you're using the soul or the spirit. Because people, all animals, all life is composed of two things, the physical and the spirit. And it's the spirit which is the important thing. So there you go. and then in the end I varnish it, and that is the painting, and that's really all I can say about it at this particular time. Thank you for listening.